And good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Monks reporting from the Link NKY World Headquarters in downtown Covington. This is the Frankfort Link Live. As always, I'm joined by Link NKY politics and government reporter Mark Payne. Mark, good evening to you. And Mark
Thanks for having me, Michael. Sorry about that. I had to
Mm.
unmute myself, but I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight and speaking with Representative Maddox. And
That's right. Our
Lee
special
Crume as
guest this evening is the Republican State Representative of Dry Ridge, Savannah Maddox. Representative Maddox, so grateful that you could make some time for us this evening.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to join you.
We're going to be talking about some legislation that's important to the representative, as well as broader issues in Frankfort and their impact on Northern Kentucky specifically, and the state more broadly. First, I want you all who are watching to drop us a comment if you have a question, a reaction, and we can relay that either to Mark or to the state representative. And we also want to hear your reaction to receiving the Link Reader. That is our new bi-monthly print publication that is going directly to every household in Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties. Our apologies to Representative Maddox. We may expand to Grant County in the future, but in the meantime, it's just the three northernmost counties. Also, I know a lot of you might have basketball on the mind this evening. Northern Kentucky Norse men and women in action this hour as the postseason is underway. Right now, the NKU women are trailing at the end of the third quarter in the Horizon League quarterfinals. They're playing at Cleveland State right now. Cleveland State, the fourth seed, NKU, the fifth seed. Cleveland State up 44-33 with just one quarter to play. And they are about to tip off in Highland Heights for the men's action, where third-seeded Northern Kentucky is hosting sixth-seeded Detroit. We'll keep you updated throughout the hour as necessary. First, I want to turn to Representative Maddox and just in general, get a reaction from you for how the session has gone from your perspective. This is our first chance to talk this session.
I think that the session has gone very well so far. It's kind of hard to believe that we're already 40 days into the 60-day session. At first, the majority of the energy and momentum centralized around accomplishing redistricting, and then we jumped straight into the budget. And of course, those are pretty complicated tapestries, to say the least. But unlike any other session, it has been kind of a hurry up and wait to a certain extent, as well as we vet issues and try to come up with some good sound public policy.
And we were talking a bit off air before we went live for our viewers. This is almost normal, maybe not in terms of waiting for this or that piece of legislation, but does it look like we're back pretty much, so to speak, after being disrupted for a couple of years?
I feel like we're back, and it couldn't have come a moment too soon for me personally, because at the end of 2020 and pretty much the entirety of 2021, including during the special session, there were restrictions on folks coming down to the Capitol, whether it was the folks who advocate for policy in terms of lobbyists or citizens themselves or the media. It has always been important to me to be able to have that dialogue. And, although we have alternative options like Zoom and are able to correspond in that way, it's just not the same as having a face-to-face discussion about the issues that impact so many Kentuckians.
I'll turn now to Mark Payne, Lincoln KY politics and government reporter. He is embedded in Frankfort for the duration of the 2022 Kentucky General Assembly session. And Mark, as always, we asked you to reflect on this week, not a week without controversy. What did you see this week?
No, it has been some big things that passed this week, particularly in Northern Kentucky. We're going to talk a little bit about the bridge tonight. And I agree with Representative Maddox too. I have heard around the Capitol that one of the things that people are most excited about is the bringing back of pages on the House and Senate floor. So it sounds like that's exciting. It seems like things are getting back to normal a little bit. But there's also been some movement on gun legislation this week. So of all the things that have gone on with the omnibus abortion bill and the Brent Spence Bridge, there's been some movement on a gun bill that would make Kentucky a Second Amendment sanctuary. The bill passed the House Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Protection Committee on Tuesday. It's been on the orders of the day on the House for Wednesday and Thursday, but it hasn't received any movement or any readings yet. The bill is sponsored by Representative Josh Bray, a Republican. And he says the House Bill 29 is a bill that would designate the state of Kentucky as a Second Amendment sanctuary state. The concept behind the bill isn't anything new. As a matter of fact, there have been 15 states that have enacted similar legislation, including Tennessee and Missouri. Right now, 115 out of 120 counties in Kentucky have something similar as far as a Second Amendment sanctuary goes. And I know Representative Maddox sits on that committee, and she had some interesting comments this week as far as, potentially strengthening the bill because, there has been the bill potentially might not be enforceable, and some of the terminology might be poorly defined. And then, I'll let Representative Maddox speak for herself. But yeah, she is looking to strengthen that bill as much as possible.
Representative
Yes,
Maddox.
and it's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. In previous years, various sponsors have filed a Second Amendment sanctuary bill, including myself. And Representative Bray's bill, House Bill 29, is good. And then I'm glad that there's some momentum around this issue. And it's important not just to myself, but a myriad of Kentuckians across the Commonwealth. I do think that there is room for improvement in so much as this iteration of the bill lacks any type of enforcement mechanism. In other words, it just basically spells out the various provisions within it without having any teeth, as we would say in Frankfort. And I think that we could put some additional language in there to make it a little bit stronger and to more narrowly define some of the terminology. But, one way or the other, I'm just really glad that we are taking a proactive step on Second Amendment legislation. I also have House Bill 123, which is the Firearm Industry Non-Discrimination Act. It actually passed out of the House last year and died in the Senate. So it's been refined a little bit. And I am hopeful that we can get that moving through committee and through the process this year.
What does that mean, gun manufacturer discrimination?
Yes. And the way that House Bill 123 is constructed this year, it would prohibit state government from entering into any contracts with banks that have a policy, an outward policy of discriminating against individuals on the basis of firearm ownership or firearm manufacturing, ammunition manufacturing. Other states are doing this as well. I know Texas has done it. And it gets back to the concept of what types of financial institutions will the state do business with, and under what circumstances.
Are there examples of that being an issue in the Commonwealth?
Originally, whenever I drafted the bill, what I had sought to do was address circumstances that were taking place in terms of folks who owned gun stores that had issues with PayPal and other types of financial institutions where they would refuse to operate or provide services to them based on the fact that it was a firearm selling entity. And I have just now begun to scratch the surface on the concept of ESGs in terms of that scoring and how that can work. And frankly, the impact that can have on financial institutions and other types of corporations.
You have made an issue of the Second Amendment. I think I've seen posts from you on social media that you would like to see Kentucky be, and correct me if I'm phrasing this inaccurately, maybe the most Second Amendment friendly state in the country. What are some examples of the state being unfriendly to gun ownership?
Yeah, I think that a state that is unfriendly to gun ownership would be a state that has restrictions on the types of firearms that you can possess, or the amount of ammunition that you can have, or your ability to carry a concealed weapon without training. In 2019, Kentucky passed constitutional carry. I filed the House version and was fortunate to carry the Senate version to its passage. That was a huge priority. And frankly, it is the most meaningful step forward that we have taken to date since we've taken over the supermajority in terms of making sure that we're protecting and expanding the right to keep and bear arms in the Commonwealth.
I guess what I'm curious about specific to Kentucky, you all do have a supermajority, you all being the Republican Party in both chambers. So a lot of ease passing legislation if the whole party is on board with it. And I guess I've seen Kentucky politicians, particularly of the Republican Party, emphasize their support for gun ownership and expansion of any type of rights that they see as insufficient currently. I'm just wondering what in Kentucky troubles people who have your position, that perhaps gun ownership and the rights to bear arms are threatened in
Sure.
Kentucky.
And I think at this point, a lot of it is playing defense against any type of new gun control proposals. I know that we have had to deal with a red flag law that's been proposed in the Senate, a violation of due process. But as far as being proactive, I also have a bill, and I don't anticipate that it's going to move this session, unfortunately, but that it would abolish gun-free zones. And I think that that's important in so much as I think law-abiding Kentuckians should have the rights to be able to defend themselves from the lawless. But it's something that you continue to build upon.
And I know that Mark Payne, Lincoln KY politics and government reporter, has covered some of Representative Maddox's emphasis on this type of legislation. What are you hearing from other lawmakers, Mark, about these bills?
What's interesting this session is that I don't, if you guys might be familiar with Whitney Austin, she was one of the victims in the third shooting in downtown Cincinnati. She has partnered with Senators Paul Hornback from Shelbyville and a Republican from Shelbyville, and Morgan McGarvey, a Democrat from Louisville, to file some legislation called CAR legislation, crisis aversion and rights retention legislation. And essentially what that would do is allow gun owners that are in crisis, that are having a mental health crisis, to be able to turn their weapons over to law enforcement or a family member or a friend, and then get those weapons back when their mental health crisis is over, or they have received the help that they have been given. Some of on one side of it, folks will say that is a red flag law, but Whitney, when I talked to Whitney, she mentioned that it was a bill that is pro Second Amendment. She's a gun owner. Most folks at her foundation are gun owners, and they want to help folks that are having mental health crisis deal with that safely before getting their guns back.
Representative Savannah Maddox is a Republican from Dry Ridge, the 61st district, which also includes all of Grant County, parts of southern Kenton, and I think a little nibble of Boone and maybe some of Scott as well. And of course, I don't know, am I wrong about that?
Well, it's changed.
I know it's changing, but like right now, you still got a good chunk of southern Kenton and a little piece of Boone.
Currently, I have the whole southern half of Kenton, a little bit of Boone, all of Grant, and northern Scott, but it just changed to where I'll now have a part of Kenton, significant part of southern Boone, and then Grant and Gallatin County. So this is new.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about redistricting and your reaction to that new district as you seek re-election this year coming up momentarily. We'll also talk about the Brent Spence Bridge, since that is of regional concern, and your thoughts on the announcement that was made this week. But before we move off of the topic of guns, I know that's an important issue for you. What are your thoughts to that piece of legislation brought by Senators Hornback and McGarvey?
I think that the key is to make sure that we're never in a situation where we are violating due process. And so much as previous iterations of that legislation have created a scenario where people's firearms can be seized before they've even had their day in court. I also think that it's very important not to commingle or stigmatize any type of mental health issue by creating this scenario where people are perceived as being unstable, because of course, we only want folks to be mindful in their ownership, storage, and usage of firearms and of sound mind. But at the same time, we cannot have a situation where we're passing legislation that would violate due process.
There is a piece of legislation that proposes lowering, is it concealed carry from 21 years old to 18-year-olds being able to participate in the concealed carry option. Is that something that you're sponsoring or co-sponsoring?
I don't anticipate that that will move the session either, because we're getting towards, sine die closer and closer every day. But that said, it's a function of the fact that if you are 18 years old, you are, lawfully able to possess a firearm. And um, we we're in a position of sending folks overseas into war. And I don't see any reason why they should not be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights lawfully. There are a whole host of reasons. I myself, whether it's firearm ownership, whether it's use of tobacco or anything of that nature, am not of the mind of moving the age up to 21, because we did that not too long ago in the legislature based on what happened at the federal level with tobacco. But either 18 is the age of majority, either 18 is adulthood or it isn't. And I just kind of see this incrementalism in public policy. But just a thought.
Representative Maddox, where are you on the proposal to legalize access to cannabis in Kentucky?
I am in favor of medical marijuana. I have co-sponsored that legislation every year since being elected to serve in the General Assembly. I voted in committee, and we had an opportunity to vote it out of the House, but the Senate, they've been a little reluctant to take that measure up.
But not recreational? You don't support recreational access?
I recall you asking me about that back in 2018, as a matter of fact, in Dry Ridge, where I stood on recreational marijuana. And I definitely think that we need to decriminalize, in so much as we've got folks who are incarcerated over crimes that they should not be related to marijuana. But jumping in to legalization of recreational marijuana, that has not been a policy focus of mine. And frankly, I think that that is not something that the legislature, if we can't get medical marijuana passed, I don't think there's a lot of appetite for that.
Well, let's move on to some of the COVID mitigation. You've been one of the more vocal critics of some of the mitigation efforts taken by Governor Andy Beshear over the past couple of years. I don't think there are a lot of remaining mandates that we could even discuss, but I know you've been critical maybe since the beginning of some of the mitigation efforts. And I think you frame this in a way that suggests an imbalance in what is supposed to be the co-equal branches of state government, executive, legislative, where you are, and judicial, of course. And at some point or another, all three of those branches have weighed in on the way that we've dealt with COVID in our federalist system here in the United States. What were your biggest concerns over the past couple of years?
Dating back to March of 2020, I felt like we were seeing a heavy-handed reaction from the executive branch, in so much as the lockdowns and mandates. And we've spoken ad nauseum about shutting down churches, shutting down businesses, and some of the aftermath of our economy and the damage that did. But really, the fundamental issue was an imbalance of power among the three branches, and a lot of that stemmed from KRS 39A. Kentucky was one of only 3 states that had no limitations, no reasonable limitations on emergency power, and also couldn't call itself back into session. I do feel like we rectified that aspect of it, but I still think that we have to be mindful to redefine the appropriate role of government in our lives. And that goes beyond the 3 branches. But, what is the role of government in the context of a public health crisis? What is the role of government outside of the context of a public health crisis? And I think that there has been a reinvigoration for individual liberty and for people paying closer attention to the kind of broad-reaching power that state government has in their lives.
What kind of legislation are we seeing, Mark Payne, related to COVID, either mandates or these types of discrepancies that different elected officials see between the co-equal branches of government?
Yeah, the most recent resolution related to COVID was Senate Joint Resolution 150, which would end the state of emergency in Kentucky. There has also been House Bill 51, which would ban statewide mask mandates. I know that both chambers have talked a lot about local control, and local control is a big subject in both chambers. They believe that local officials should be able to make those decisions. Well, House Bill 51 would essentially ban it statewide. But with the CDC releasing their recent guidelines, it doesn't seem like it's going to end up, getting a vote or end up being a big issue. And then, with Senate Joint Resolution 150, that did pass the Senate. I don't know if it's been discussed in the House yet. Representative Maddox might be able to give me good insight there. I don't believe it's had any movement in the House. I believe it's still in committee. But that would end the state of emergency in Kentucky. And Bashir, opponents have said that would prevent Kentucky from getting federal funding, and Kentucky has received a lot of money from both ARPA funds and CARES Act during the pandemic. But folks on the other side say it's time, it's over. People are tired of it. People want to get back to normal. And I think even for us, Michael, folks that have been diligent in mask wearing and getting vaccines, that I think we might be tired of it too.
There's no doubt about that, being tired of it. And I'll get some reaction from our state representative in just a moment. First, let me remind you, you are watching the Frankfort Link Live, brought to you by Link NKY. You can find our consistent coverage of the ongoing General Assembly session in Frankfort at linknky.com. Our Mark Payne, state government and politics reporter, is in Frankfort for the duration of the session. For the most part, sometimes he's popping around Northern Kentucky as well. So we're always glad to see him in the office too. And I am Michael Monks reporting from that office in downtown Covington. We're joined today by Republican State Representative Savannah Maddox of the very fine city of Dry Ridge, Kentucky. I want to remind you that you can get your news every day at linknky.com, and that's where you can sign up for our daily email. Wake up in the morning with all of the important news from Northern Kentucky. The daily link will be in your inbox whenever you're ready. We've also got the Kentucky Side, our brand new podcast hosted by me. 3 episodes already up for your listening pleasure. Just go to linknky.com and click on podcasts, and we hope you enjoyed that as well. State Representative Maddox, over the course of the 2 years, I mean, there were inconsistent messages from various levels of government, different policy positions on responding to COVID, maybe determined by the political makeup of who was making those decisions. But even that would be inconsistent. Maybe Democrat governors were doing one thing in one state, another thing in another, same for Republicans. In a lot of ways. Mark Payne referenced that we were masking and received vaccinations. I received the double dose of the vaccine and a booster shot as well. I wore masks where I thought was appropriate. What did you think about the public response and the way that we were left to kind of navigate these murky waters because of how politicized this once in a century health crisis faced our country and the world?
I hope it's once in a century, and I hope that it never transpires again. But that said, you talk about the murky waters, and I think that inconsistent messaging from the very onset, if you go back to the time when we were told early on not to go out and buy masks, and then we were told, yes, you should wear a mask, you should wear a cloth mask. I think that what was missing throughout this process was the public trust. And that's where you started to get some of those early divisions and those rifts that kind of set in and then became politicized. Because, every person, I feel like, when hearing the news, the coronavirus coming over and seeing the images out of China and other parts of Asia of what it was doing at that time, everyone was fearful. So you take that fear in conjunction with inconsistent public policy, and it's going to create some issues. And then, of course, shutting down the economy, that is something that I don't think that any of us would have ever envisioned taking place. And it was jarring, and we cannot ignore the implications for so many of Kentucky's families, because I can remember a time when I would get, 10 to 15 calls about unemployment a day because our unemployment system was not adequate, wasn't set up properly to take the influx. And I've lost count of the numbers, but at one point there were, I don't even want to say a number because I'm afraid it'll be wrong, but there were just so many folks that were struggling, out of work, weren't able to get assistance, and they weren't able to benefit from the pandemic unemployment assistance as well because they couldn't get through, and it was a mess. But back to the commentary that was made earlier about the Senate's resolution to end the state of emergency, I think that is high past time. In fact, they, meaning the legislature, has extended the state of emergency 3 times now. And I have voted not to extend the state of emergency. So it's definitely time. And I understand the argument about the federal dollars, but we've already received the ARPA funding and have a certain amount of time to spend it. And it's, well incorporated within the budget. So it's time to cut loose of those federal injections and get Kentuckians back to work. We have a 54% workforce participation rate among able-bodied adults. So it's time.
I'm wondering, I want to follow up on what you just referenced there, that the legislature has extended the state of emergency. And as we noted at the top of this, your party, the Republican Party, doesn't just have control, but dominates super majorities in both. So this is, there are Republicans who are voting to support that. And I'm curious about you. You're in your second term now, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
you've been down there for a couple of terms now, and you're seeking a third. And I'm wondering, where do you fit in the Republican caucus? Can you share with us on how your relationship is with the rest of the Republican Party in Frankfort?
I feel like I have a great relationship with my colleagues, and there are always robust discussions on policy issues because I am somewhat of an ideologue. I make no bones about that. But that said, I think that regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum, when you first arrive in Frankfort, you have an opportunity to encounter people from all walks of life and different experiences that have some different ideas than you do. And I think that I add a certain dimension to our caucus, just like everybody else. I think that I fit in well to the extent that I don't shy away from speaking my mind, and I am also willing to listen. And I think that that's the most important part, is being willing to listen.
We did see a pretty significant display of bipartisanship earlier this week, Mark Payne, right here in Covington at the Northern Kentucky Convention Center. And that's where Democratic Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and Republican Ohio Governor Mike DeWine appeared together, along with lawmakers and mayors and local officials of various stripes, to announce that they were signing a document apparently we're all familiar with already, but they were signing it again. And this time they mean it, that they're going hard after some federal dollars to get the Brent Spence Bridge project rolling again. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, so we have been here before, certainly, with other groups of politicians. This document is called the Memorandum of Understanding, and it is a document that essentially says that both states are going to work together to seek funding for the bridge. Both states are jointly seeking around $2 billion in funding for the project, and the funding, the majority of it, would come from the 2021 infrastructure bill that was passed on the federal level. And Mike DeWine said, "We believe this is one significant step forward to building a new bridge and improve the current bridge. I don't have to tell anybody in this room the importance of the bridge." It's certainly an important bridge. And I asked a lot of people this question, Michael. Back in 2015, or it might have been 2016, former Governor Steve Beshear and Ohio Governor Jim Kasich met, and they did something similar. The bridge back then had the potential to have tolls, which wasn't a popular option, but they kind of had this agreement as well. And so I framed that question to a couple of folks, what makes this time different? And I talked to Brent Kruper, the president of the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I talked to Joe Meyer, the mayor of Covington, and I talked to Senator Chris McDaniel, a Republican from Kenton County. And they all said, what makes this time different is that the money is actually there. If you remember back in January when Governor Andy Beshear proposed his budget, he also mentioned $250 million from the general fund. That's something that's never been offered from the state, to the best of my knowledge. But when Governor Mike DeWine from Ohio was kind of pressed about how much money they would offer up, he was a little vague on that number. But like I said, the majority of folks who seem much more knowledgeable about the issue than I do say it's as close as it's ever been, and it's likely to happen.
Senator McConnell sent a statement supporting the effort as well. Obviously, Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader in the U.S. Senate. We should note that Congressman Thomas Massie, a Republican, and our other Senator Rand Paul, also a Republican, did not vote for the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill that created the opportunity for this funding. We're joined today by State Representative Savannah Maddox, a Republican of Dry Ridge. I got to know Dry Ridge pretty well during my 2 years doing the morning news at WNKR for Grant County Broadcasters, and drove there every morning in the middle of the night to get ready for those newscasts. So I got to learn that stretch of 75. And my goodness, do you have a lot of dead deer in certain seasons on the side of that highway on the way down to Dry Ridge. But that's not the only problem. I mean, it is a major interstate highway that connects Michigan all the way down to Florida. And that's the emphasis that a lot of folks place when pushing to move forward on the Brent Spence corridor project, because it's not just about the bridge directly connecting Covington to Cincinnati as a major national artery. What were your thoughts on the announcement we saw this week?
Well, despite the fact that I don't have that portion of Kenton County, you couldn't have said it better. It's extremely important to so many folks in the Northern Kentucky region and, frankly, throughout the Commonwealth that we address that situation. And when you say $2 billion and you understand that 2.8 billion is what it is projected to cost to address this situation, it says, okay, 2 billion out of 2.8, but in all actuality, we're left with 800 million. And, between Ohio and between Kentucky, even if it were split right down the middle, 400 million. So it's still quite a consideration. And it's good that we now have the opportunity to address that in so much as we do have additional funding. But the most important thing about it to me is the lack of tolls, because that is just an absolute non-starter in Northern Kentucky. Definitely not in favor of tolls. So I'm very encouraged to hear that that's not even part of this discussion.
I want to share a question from a viewer on our Facebook page. Adam Fritsch wants to know whether state employees should have a cost of living increase this year. Representative Maddox.
I anticipate that they will in the budget in all likelihood, because we have been working feverishly to come up with our version of it. And then, of course, the Senate has theirs as well. We passed ours early on, but there's still tweaks that will take place in free conference committee. And I anticipate that there will in all likelihood be raises for state workers. And on the cost of living adjustment aspect of it, whether it's that, whether it's a raise, I think that we're going to end up having the flexibility to do some good things. But I am very hesitant to make specific promises until we see how that comes out of the process a little further down. And hopefully the Senate will begin their side of things. I know March was kind of when they were going to begin their side. So we tried to hit the ground running, but we've still got plenty of time.
Okay, two quick things before we let you run and you can get on with your evening. I want to let our viewers know that we will have a conversation about the Brent Spence Bridge on the other side of this, so stay tuned. That's coming up next here on the Frankfort Link Live. We talked about redistricting briefly. What are your thoughts on the new district? I guess you've got a lot less of Kenton County, a lot more of Boone County, and you are going to be introducing yourself to a new group of voters in Gallatin County while keeping all of Grant County. So your thoughts on that process and where your district landed?
I'm very pleased with the way that it turned out, in so much as there's quite a bit of dialogue and always has been in the Northern Kentucky counties. So Boone and Kenton, whether I have a little bit less or a little bit more of one, I've always worked in the context of with those county governments and with citizens. And Gallatin County is new, but it's not it's not very culturally different or disconnected in any way, shape, or form from the other county that I reside in and am from, Grant County. So I think that it's going to be good. And I am very pleased to continue to work with other members of the Northern Kentucky Caucus. I think we work well together and are able to have a pretty broad understanding of the different issues that each county presents.
We know you're running for re-election this year to represent that new 61st district, that newly drawn 61st district. When will we know whether you're running for governor next year?
I have been so humbled by the amount of support that I've received of folks encouraging me to run for governor. And I have loved serving in the General Assembly and having the opportunity, and certainly am paying attention and wouldn't rule anything along those lines out. But at this moment in time, I am focused on doing the job that I was currently elected to do and serving in the legislature. But I do think that we are well positioned in the Commonwealth to lead on the issues that matter to me and matter to the majority of Kentuckians in terms of advocating for conservative values. So I'm all in on doing whatever I can to build on that and keep up the momentum.
It sounds like you're considering entering that race.
That would be an accurate statement.
Okay. Do you have like a deadline and I don't want to pressure you too much on that. I know that you guys in politics have ways of answering that type of question to buy some time from us journalists. But, in Kentucky, you got to pick a running mate. You want to start fundraising because the primaries do come up in the spring. So when should we expect for you to move either beyond considering and determining yes or no?
Well, actually, now the gubernatorial slate has changed in so much as you don't have to pick a running mate prior to the primary. So that aspect of it's different. But, we're going to try.
When did
to
that happen? How did I miss that?
I think maybe a year ago. I should know the exact year that it happened, but it has changed now. But right now I'm going to focus on finishing strong in 2022 and pray about things to come.
That is State Representative Savannah Maddox, a Republican from Dry Ridge, who just gave me a state civics lesson. So I appreciate that. And thank you for the time. I hope you'll come back on and talk to us again soon.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. You can just click leave on your side of Zoom. That's how we'll do things around here. And we'll talk to you later. You can see that Lee Crume from the Tri-County Economic Development Authority, also known as Triad, has now joined us. We're going to talk about infrastructure, the Burn Spence Bridge announcement, and other economic development issues in Northern Kentucky. First, let's give you a link NKY, NKU basketball update. Bad news out of Cleveland this evening. The Northern Kentucky women's basketball team has fallen as a 5th seed to 4th seeded Cleveland State, 59-51. So that ends the NKU women's basketball's conference tournament run. So we'll keep an eye out on which postseason tournament they end up in. With a 21-8 record right now, they're sure to play in some postseason tournament, but unfortunately it will not be the NCAA tournament. And we move to Highland Heights now, where the NKU men's basketball team is also an